All right, welcome, everybody. This is In-Depth Connections, Blacklight for the Culture. My name is Lee. I'm going to be your host, and I have Joshua Hale here with me today to help unpack this conversation. I'm actually an artist of many means, as you guys will come to find out. But right here, right now, I'm acting as a voice for the people. So with this being our very first episode, I do want to read to you guys our mission statement and our value statement, just so you can get an idea for what we're all about and what we hope you to get out of this program. So we strive to rejuvenate and reconnect the community with itself amidst the general social climates that we face today as a society. At the same time, we strive to inspire self-reflection within our listeners and viewers, as well as those who may participate in these discussions that we have. And using this as a basis, we aim to express these topics interpretively through film to create greater vehicles for social awareness and social justice. So in future episodes, you'll see some kind of relevant shorts and things like that we put together just to really emphasize, and drive home the point that we're trying to make here. And as far as the value of this podcast, the mission, it'll stimulate growth within the listeners, so that's you, the viewers and the participants, and it'll serve as a platform for discussion within the community and make it more aware of itself and the greater communities that it's a part of on a larger scale. This will be something that people are able to enjoy at every single turn. So with that being said, today, the focus of our discussion is going to be on the following, and that's Black culture as it pertains to Black men and their pursuit of success through education. So we all know that Black men in America are faced with a very, very unique set of circumstances. I don't think that there is any group really out there that faces so much pressure racially, socially, economically, culturally, on such a continuous basis. And, some would even argue that peace for a Black man is a delicacy, and it's something that we really live in pursuit of. So without further ado, Josh, welcome. It's definitely a pleasure to have you on, man. So I just want to get into it, man. First impressions.
Okay.
How you feeling?
I'm feeling good today. I woke up, I got some coffee.
Yeah.
I try not to drink too much of it, but I was in the mood for it this morning.
Okay.
So I'm already feeling good, man. How about you?
I'm feeling pretty good, man. I'm really excited to get into what we have to talk about today. I know this is a very interesting topic, and it's something that, is personally relevant to the both of us, just, being
sure,
Black
yeah.
men in STEM. So yeah, I'm really excited to get into this discussion. So really our first main question that I really wanted to unpack and ask you, man, is what sort of education would you say that Black men are pursuing? And that can just be based on your general impression or anything that you might be aware of as far as the climate.
So, personally, before, and I had actually thought about this before actually looking it up, but what I thought it would be is something more so in the realms of, arts or business, just because I believe that those are the things that kind of resonate the most with our culture, historically, but then, also just currently as well.
Yeah.
Then when actually looking at them, seeing stuff that they said that it was mainly in areas like law or social work or health or things like that, which I do think kind of very much so reflects what goes on in our communities, the things that we're kind of concerned with.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I think. But yeah, what are your thoughts on it?
Growing up, man, I felt like all of the well put together, Black people that I would be around, whether it was older relevant or relatives and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I feel like it was always something policeman was a solid career. Something like being a clergyman was, a really respectable career within the community. Doing things like public accounting and finding maybe a bank or something like that to work at, working in some kind of clerical capacity is something that I saw a lot of, adults around me doing. And on top of that, also just being in roles of mentorship. I guess you could say community engagement organizations. Whenever I was younger, thinking about, what do Black people grow up and go on to do, it was always some kind of rotation of all of these things. And that was, kind of strange because for me, man, I was always interested in math and stuff. And,
yeah.
I always say my dream job was to be an architect, which mm-hmm. is drawing and, really math heavy. So yeah, that was never my impression of, like what, black men especially even are pursuing. Because like I didn't have anybody in my family that, you know what I'm saying, like went after anything real STEM related. But yeah, I guess based on some of like the things that we have seen, like looking into this, I do want to point out that when it comes to like black people and the majors that they pursue, well, first let me ask, what would you think is the most pursued after or more sought after like major that black people end up with?
So from personal experience, I've seen people like my peers that are African American pursue careers in like things related to business or social work. I don't see it as much in areas of STEM unless it's like in concentrated places. Like there were some programs that I had attended where they had specifically had people that were like African American who were interested in STEM. So I know there's a lot out there, but it's still relatively scattered in comparison. But yeah, I would say it's definitely in areas like business that I've seen it, communications, social work, stuff like that.
Okay. So I also did like a little digging into, I guess you could say like what black people are actually doing. You have different groups that go out there and they spend like years gathering data and, putting together like a picture so that you can really see what this is. But whenever I like took the time to look into it myself, I was actually surprised that the number one like major that you see black people graduating with is student school counseling.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so student school counseling. I guess like what are your thoughts on something like that being like the number one?
I think it definitely reflects what goes on with kind of what the need was, especially, or I can say still is, with what goes on in the African American community, especially for people that grew up in a place where they felt at least racially or culturally isolated, feeling like they needed somebody who was not just a counselor, but somebody who looked like them or came from an environment like them. I know that was something that I wanted a lot more of when I was younger. Like if there was an older African American male that I could have talked to a bit more frequently, because like I had different academic experiences where I was definitely a minority. So being able to see somebody who's in a place of emotional or spiritual or academic maturity would have definitely been something that helped me get over certain obstacles a lot quicker than probably it would have taken.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of what comes to mind for me when I see that.
Yeah, dude. Honestly, I think it's so interesting when you look at like the top 10, and we can run through it. But when it comes to like school counseling and stuff like that, like it kind of makes me think about like my own experience as like a student who went into like getting advising sessions, and like none of the counselors would like look like me or anything like that. And it's crazy because I would go in there to get advised. And it was like I would have like this like idea for like what I wanted to do and like all this stuff, and like they would actively be like lowering my trajectory, like aim lower.
Yeah, I see
like, and that was something that like was real. Like I literally stopped going to like the guidance counselor because I felt like they was trying to like chump me off like every single time I went in there. And so like I think it's interesting when you look at like the top 10. So you got student school counseling, human services and community organization, counseling, psychology, health and medical admin, public administration. That's the top 5. And then after that, you got social work, social sciences, general medical and health services, public policy, and then you got community and public health.
Yeah, I think that's, when you list that off, like what I hear like resonating very well with that is community-based work, stuff that's focused on helping us have like that stronger thing that we can, that stronger foundation to lean on. Because definitely like with things that people choose to pursue that become more specialized, like certain engineering or STEM related jobs, or even certain art jobs, like I think those things come as a result of there being a very firm foundation. and that comes with the stuff that like you just listed off there. So I guess I kind of wonder if that's kind of the place where it comes from.
Yeah.
If so, I think that's a very positive thing that we see ourselves in places where we want to address the current issues that we're experiencing in society. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what comes to mind for me when I think about it. What about you?
I guess like for me, when I think about this, it almost like it's almost like when all of these things are roles that like you could walk around and you could see these people like in your community, or you could go to where they work or something like that, and it's almost like when it comes to the way that like the psychology of choosing what you want to do with your life works, it's like, where can I perceive the disparity? Like how can I experience the disparity? And I feel like when it comes to things like student school counseling, that's something that somebody would have a firsthand experience with whatever disparity that might be there because of a lack of representation. And you can go down the line here and you could say the same for all of these. Like so you could imagine like social work, how that could be something that could impact someone very strongly enough to where they feel like I need to get into that so I can make a change in that field. But I find it very interesting that, out of these top 10 for what Black people pursue, where these, incomes fall along the spectrum of what like the earning potential of these roles is. And it's very interesting to see that how like low like the income ranges for this versus any other major that you might go after that might be in a more technical role or a more corporate role or something like that has like higher earning potential. So I find it interesting that there is that correlation between this is what Black people pursue and these are the set of the lowest earning majors, and like they are like almost the same.
Yeah, and like now that you like bring that up, something I was looking at earlier was like for the top paying jobs for African Americans in the like here, they have a mean income of about $40,000 a year, and that's for the lowest paying jobs for African Americans with a bachelor's degree. And the percentage for those who attend college for that is a lot higher than that for the higher paying jobs. And something I wonder about is if that has a lot to do with this perception thing about being able to see yourself in a position before really having that confidence level to pursue it or feel like that's a place where you belong in. That's something that I feel like I've definitely struggled with when choosing to pursue like a STEM career when I got into college. Because you'll have a lot of people that will tell you, especially if they're not from your background, like, oh yeah, you do good in this career or that, like you should get into something athletic, or you should get into something that's art based. And it's cool to see that we have people like us that are doing well in places like that. But something I don't often hear, if ever, is, oh, you should pursue engineering. I think you do well in that area. Oh, you have an interest in math. Maybe you should go to school for something related to that. And, I've never seen it except for places outside of except for places within my community where that kind of stuff is encouraged. So for me, it seems like that has a lot to deal with kind of that disparity that we see when it comes to those places where percentages of people like us is a lot lower. But yeah, I mean, I think that the way to kind of like solve a lot of that stuff has to do with how African Americans are addressed in education before college. Like the thing you said with the guidance counselors and things like that. Like if there were more people, I would say from the African American community, but also people that are from other cultures that can encourage students while they're still in that I'm figuring myself out stage, that they can go and do these things. I think that would help a lot more with youths being able to envision themselves so that by the time they get to a place to where they're making like life-changing decisions, like they can choose something where if they want to do art, they can do art. But if they want to do something different than that, they can pursue it without feeling like they belong more in one space than they do in the other.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I think that representation, is probably something that's very important with respects to like those things and what a child might think is like, possible for them. And at the same time, I feel like when I think about the grand scheme of like where Black people are at as a whole, and as like a general community, and where the focus currently is, it's almost like we're kind of like budding, like we're like in adolescence, and we are focusing on developing like these people that can be staples within community and things like that. And as those roles become more saturated, maybe it's the case that then you will start seeing more people saturate other more STEM-based majors, because we've got a good handle on those things within the community, and good representation to feel like we don't need to intercede in that space because we've already got people who are interceding on our behalf. So that was kind of like a thought that I had, when we were, I guess, talking about it. It's almost like we're growing up, and I feel like when it comes to Black people, we had a really late start. You know what I'm saying? Like as a community, to being able to establish a community, like in a sensible manner, and it's almost like we just don't know any better. And I feel like that not knowing any better is also like a really big component of like the trajectory and the direction that we decide to go in. There was a study that I looked into that it stated that only 57% of Black students have access to the range of math and sciences that they would need for college readiness. And if you look at that percentage, just thinking that, okay, only 57% of those Black students are ready to go to college and be successful. The other ones probably won't end up being successful and potentially might, like end up not going to college in general. And out of that 57%, thinking about the dropout rate, it's like how many people are actually going into and making it out of college. If only 57% of students go into college and then 40% of those like drop out, like what, how few are actually making it through to the end?
Yeah, and like when you bring that up, like that whole image of like when people are in college and they start to see people that they either relate to or that they come from the same culture or background as them starting to leave, then especially if they find their sense of belonging with the community of people that are becoming less common as they continue to advance in that place, then it almost, I think, brings up these questions of, well, I know that I as a person feel like I belong here because I'm doing whatever it is to continue in this field or doing whatever it is to continue excelling in this area, but because I'm seeing less of people like me in general here, it can bring up that conflicting thought in the back of your head of like, do people like me belong here?
Yeah.
And by me personally being able to like excel in an area such as this, does that make me less like people that are like me, or does it mean that I'm redefining something?
Yeah.
Personally, I think that it just means you're redefining it because, like, again, there's a first in everything, and people aren't going to start adopting something as a commonality until they see people taking that in strides or doing that confidently. Like this is the new normal or whatnot.
Yeah.
But so something I did want to bring up was like the whole thing about how institutionally there's certain kinds of setbacks that prohibit advancement without certain kinds of effort being applied. But I also thought about like how there were certain advancements that happened in our community that kind of have depreciated over time just because of things either in media or things, again, that have happened institutionally to kind of reverse those processes. Mm-hmm. But like you had things like Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there was Black Wall Street, and you had like predominantly African-American communities that were prospering. But then, of course, they had the 2-day massacre that kind of, wiped out a lot of people there. Mm-hmm. And I think that was definitely a reflection of people that are already in America not liking the idea of change or the idea of there being this diverse sense of community success.
Yeah.
And because that is so foreign to a culture, especially back then, there was definitely this sense of, oh no, I don't want to see people that don't come from a community that looks like mine prospering. I think there's a way for that to happen in a way that's healthy, but still, at the end of the day, when stuff like that happens, then it starts introducing those setbacks that start bringing up those mentalities that might not be so true. But, I kind of just thought about that when...
And man, I don't know. I feel like that, like you bringing that up is like so significant, because when it comes to things like a massacre, like I feel like we don't really consider the severity of how much that can set like an entire people back. Black Wall Street, that was the concentration of all the best parts of, what gave black people at that time any sort of economic worth or any kind of economic power. Mm-hmm. And that was something that a lot of black people looked to for guidance and as somewhat of a beacon of light. And for something like that to happen that massacred so many people and entirely destroyed the city, that's something that was felt not just by the people of Tulsa, but in the greater black community that was watching them and looking to them to show them the way forward. And so it's like that right there is traumatizing.
Yeah.
It's like people-wide traumatizing. And I feel like something like that would act like the biggest barrier to someone feeling like they have the right or the ability to go in and make changes and improve their community.
Yeah.
I feel like that's why we're kind of still where we're at right now when it comes to how we're trying to build our communities. And they're also just fractured.
Yeah, and like another factor that I think like plays a big part in this is like the whole thing with Black Wall Street. That happened like almost 100 years ago, like a couple more years than that. But like that was in the 20s, and that was around the time where media had started picking up with things like more films were being made, and as that went on, then you had the introduction of like these new forms of music like jazz and all of that. And there was starting to be this deviation from traditional culture that started to happen. And I believe that through those mediums, like the music and, what people see on TV, those deal a lot with perception. Yeah. If you see a movie, especially back then, since there wasn't the conveniences of stuff like streaming and things like that, you would watch it repetitively, or especially music, even today, we play it over and over again. So like the messages and stuff that are put in those things, those are the things that we're ultimately eating or consuming into our minds at the end of the day. Yeah. And in my personal opinion, I feel like there was definitely a decline on certain messages that existed, especially in African American films or movies that weren't necessarily accurate to what it is that we want to pursue. Because, of course, when you look at the numbers, you see that the first thing that African Americans pursuing higher education in is things to build their community. Yeah. But then you see things on TV or in music that say that we want to do the opposite of that. Yeah. And I don't know if maybe it has something to do with the fact that industries that promote black entertainment oftentimes are controlled by people that don't come from those backgrounds. Right. So you could have a business person who's thinking about the dollar and what will just make the most sales in that moment, rather than something that will help the mindset of those who are consuming it. Yeah. So I definitely feel like even though there could have been a moment right after things like Black Wall Street where people could start building those things up, I also think that because it was happening in the upshot of all of these kind of negative media messages, that the attack on perception is what helped things not be able to come back to the place to where they could be. Yeah. So I just kind of feel like things like that could come back if we deal with people with how they perceive themselves. Yeah. I feel like, again, it relates to that thing about certain institutional setbacks, but at the end of the day, I don't want to say that should put African Americans in a position or a mindset of making excuses about it. I feel like the same thing that happened in the civil rights era during the 50s and the 60s is kind of the mindset that has to be applied with that. Of course, there are certain setbacks that exist in our communities and things like that that we just kind of have to press against. But it is unfortunate that you can have somebody who's just as passionate about pursuing things that aren't as common in our communities like we do. But then because of whatever's going on in other areas of their lives, it kind of ruins those dreams or those aspirations. But the first thing that comes to mind for me with that is just like, I feel like there still has to be that fight for education, and the fact that it gets undermined so much, especially in this TikTok era where, you know, everybody can make money having videos reacting to people reacting to doing stuff. It's like it takes a lot away from this thing that we have content to look at and react to, because there are people that sat down and did things like inventing, reading different kinds of books and articles and having conversations and stuff like that. So
you mentioned the mindset of the '60s. Was that the fight, or what do you mean when you said that?
Just the mentality of that if there's something happening in society, not to use it so much as a crutch in order to help you walk, but almost as a stepping block, if that makes any sense. Like, just not defining who you are intrinsically as a person based on the circumstances that are going on currently in your society. I guess something that kind of relates to that is, I know that when I went to public school and I had to learn history, especially U.S. history, the furthest they would go back as far as African Americans is they would say, well, it started with slavery. And technically speaking, I guess you could say that that's true as far as African American history goes, but they don't go back too much further than that. So then there's this whole mentality that when you have somebody who's just European American or Asian American or any other race learning about their history, it usually starts off with them saying they've come to the country to establish something, whereas there's this narrative that African American history is the sole defining aspect of, because you started off being imported here as a slave, that's your original or ultimate origin, even though there's things in African history that existed much further beyond that point. So I think that kind of relates to the whole thing of people feeling like if they're not given an identity, especially historically, within their schools while they're young, saying, hey, you guys come from people that have done things, they've also contributed greatly to things in society as well as culture, then it's kind of hard to subconsciously put yourself in that place of, oh, wait, I intrinsically, or, without having to do something extra, that like I know that I come from people that have done things and therefore I feel like I can do something myself.
Dude, that makes me think about this documentary that I watched. It's called Hidden Colors. Have you ever heard of it or watched?
I've heard of Hidden Figures.
Okay. No, it's called Hidden Colors. Okay. And you've got really influential black people that are staples of black education and black social awareness. So Tariq Nasheed is one of the big names that you see on that. And just a whole bunch of different other just influencers that are advocates for the black community. So you got to see Frances Cress Welsing. She's a very outspoken advocate for black culture, black race, and she was around in the 60s, in the 50s when they were having those movements, and she was part of the boots on the ground. But I think that every black person should watch at least part one of Hidden Colors, because kind of like you were getting into where you talked about the roots and the origin of, where did black people come from, and how the narrative, it tends to stop right at slavery and what it does to like a black child or to a black person in general, to have them feel like, the whole reason that they are here and all that their life has come from is like slavery. I watched this documentary which really gets into the history of where a lot of the Aboriginal black people of the Americas came from, and beyond that, like it just tells you so much that nobody ever told you when you were in school. Like these weren't the things that they focused on in Black history. But I just remember that after I watched this Hidden Colors documentary, I felt like a sense of like power and pride and like, I don't know, I felt like I was like my ancestors touched me for the very first time, because like I became aware that there were ancestors there trying to reach me or something like that. It takes you all the way back to like Egypt. And like it follows the trail for how like, those are indeed the roots of, who we are today. And I never have felt so empowered before. So I would definitely recommend giving Hidden Colors a look. I'll definitely post a link to it in the description here. But definitely go check that one out. Wasn't even expecting to talk about this, but that is a very powerful documentary that I would recommend.
Yeah.
I guess like when it comes to why black men specifically give up in university, for me, it's really all about the difficulty it is just to live in the society and be black. You don't have as much information starting out. You don't have as many resources starting out. And when you go into the spaces that you're meant to cultivate and to grow within, you're also met with, all sorts of microaggressions, glares, and differences in treatment, which we tend to perceive as shifts in energy, despite what anybody might try to say to us. And all of these things, they put like pressures on us that can either break the focus, that can diminish the motivation, and that can at the end of the day have the effect of like diminishing like self-worth. And I feel like that's something that black men, me personally, like I experienced it. Like I almost was a part of the statistics of black men who dropped out of college. I dropped out for over a year, and I felt like I had to fight for my life. Just to be able to get back into school after I had kind of been knocked off by like life. It was like health situations and different stuff like that, and not having substantial resources to be able to support myself, and not having like guidance there to give me proper direction. You know what I'm saying? Like it kind of all fell on me, and I feel like I'm not the only person that goes through this. I think that there was a number that said that 61%. Oh no, wait. 65% of black students and 65% of black men are fully independent college students, meaning that they entirely support themselves. And I feel like a lot of those, just additional stressors and things like that don't allow you to just focus on learning, have a lot to do with I guess what causes black men to give up. Have you heard of something called imposter syndrome?
Oh, yes, I have.
Okay.
And I just recently looked up the definition, but like I didn't think that like people say that, like they'll be like, oh, do you think you might have imposter syndrome? And of course, first thing that comes to mind for me is like, I don't know what it is, but I don't have it.
Right.
I am doing perfectly fine, but like especially like to hear that as an African American individual who's doing something like pursuing excellence in an area of business or academics, or something where you don't see as much of people like us trying to pursue at a certain level. To hear something like that, it almost makes me feel like people are calling me an imposter. But like when I looked it up, I was like, oh, okay, maybe that might be true. But I don't know. Like, what do you think?
I definitely I'm very well versed in imposter syndrome. It's something that I was made aware of, I think, during it was either my freshman or my sophomore year of college, just going to one of those like little minority groups that they try to like prepare you mentally for this stuff. And like, man, that mental prep is so important. But yes, and just for the viewers and the listeners, Imposter syndrome is a psychological condition where an individual doubts their qualifications and their accomplishments and fear being exposed. And I think one important caveat of imposter syndrome is that despite any sort of accomplishments or achievements or evidence to the contrary that you are in fact not an imposter, you still experience these psychological terrors, almost is what it feels like, that you're not who you say you are, that other people aren't seeing you as who you think you are, and at the end of the day, that means that you're not that. All right, guys. Welcome back. I had to take a quick break there. So we were in the midst of discussing imposter syndrome, what that looks like to black men in the community, and we're going to get into talking about some of the ways that it shows itself and some of the ways that you and your community can help fight against this imposter syndrome it tends to plague black young professionals and people going after education. So it's something that it doesn't even just have to be within academia. It exists anywhere that black people try to intercede into a space or any place where it seems like black people are the minority. So it has the potential to show up. So I guess I do want to talk about more of the causes of what causes imposter syndrome. So negative stereotypes are obviously a big one, but also stereotypes around, just what a black person should be. Not necessarily a negative one, but a cultural stereotype is also a driver of imposter syndrome, and that's something that we kind of touched on just a minute ago. But this involves a constant need to prove oneself in academic or in corporate settings, and it's just very stressful. It's anxiety driving, and another really big cause of that imposter syndrome is lack of representation. And this is something that we've got to fight against over time, working our ways into areas where, black people haven't commonly been. But lack of representation is a big one. If you don't see anybody there that looks like you, it feels like maybe you aren't supposed to be there because nobody is there that looks like you. But also you've got things like discrimination, microaggression, and things of that nature. They also contribute. And a lot of times people in the workplace, they might not even realize that they're enacting discrimination or in an academic space. They might not even realize that they're enacting microaggressions on you that perpetuate negative stereotypes and that perpetuate things like imposter syndrome. I think one of the biggest caveats, and we kind of touched on this earlier, was kind of talking about authentic blackness. So I guess I feel like you've got some thoughts on authentic blackness. What would you say about that and how that kind of influences the prevalence of imposter syndrome?
So something that comes to mind for me when I think about imposter syndrome and just this idea of blackness, I think that the whole painting that American culture is given on either side about what it is to be a black individual is very limited. It includes some positive stereotypes, it includes some negative stereotypes, but I still think that they're both detrimental when it comes to the growth of the identity of anybody who is black. Just because, you could take something that is seen to be positive, like, oh, you're black, so you must be athletic. I went to private school during a portion of my high school experience, and the first thing that happened when I was there, it actually started in my last year of my middle school. I came there, I was a new student or whatnot, and the first thing that they approached me about, it's not about, do you want to join the chess club, do you want to be in the film group, do you want to do something in STEM? They're like, you would be good on the football team. And first thing that comes to mind is like they say that to me and my brother, y'all don't even know me, I'm a new student here. This is one of the faculty telling me, who's basically in charge of a lot of stuff there, saying that I'll be good on the football team, and they don't even know I hardly have a background in it. I'm probably one of the least athletic people you'll meet when it comes to stuff like that. Yeah. But somebody's coming up to me about it, and being kind of naive about it when I was younger, I kind of just liked the idea of somebody saying that I was good at something. So I bought into it. I was like, oh, okay, I think I'm good about it. But of course, in my mind, I'm not thinking it's because of the color of my skin or anything like that. So anyways, we start playing some games, and basically they start running some plays and whatnot, and my brother, we're trying to do stuff we don't really know what we're doing. First game happens, they think, okay, maybe he's about to have his moment, and, then it starts, and I don't even know, like, the plays or whatnot. Like, I'm not really into it or whatever,
right.
But they call, like, the first play, and I just repeat something I saw during practice. I just run left and then, like, keep running forward or whatnot, and this is during the game, and what you can see is the coach has, like, this big sense of, like, disappointment. Like, I'm just disappointed in you. Like, even though it wasn't directly spoken out, it was, like, this thing about, you must be off today, or, like, I expect you to do so much better. And I'm like, I find that very odd, given the fact that you've only seen my performance, but, like, within a short period of time. So it's like, it's like that thing about, if you're not able to do the things that they expect a black individual to do, or like an African American male, that there's this idea that you are not as black.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that, another African American student who is athletic, then comes into that space, and then they decide to identify that person as being more authentically black, and then they kind of push you over to the misfit section. Then it kind of creates this idea of, like, okay, well, now this person's being accepted for this particular thing, and they look happy. They look like they have a sense of belonging. They don't look like they're experiencing any kind of quote-unquote racism, because they're being quote-unquote loved by their quote-unquote peers or whatnot. And when you see that, it brings up a lot of questions. But I say stuff like that, like the effects of positive stereotypes still having a detrimental effect.
Yeah.
And it still exists with things like negative stereotypes too, obviously. Like, so just certain things that exist with that, and just ultimately at the end of the day, I think that in order to overcome that sense of imposter syndrome, especially as an African American or an African American male, that there has to be this sense of confidence that comes with doing things that challenge stereotypes that have been propagated over the years with respect to being an African American. And I think that's necessary. I don't think it's a negative thing. Personally, I believe it's fine if somebody who's black decides they want to play golf, and that's, become a professional. You see people that excel with that, every day. Or somebody that says, oh, I want to get involved in politics, or I want to become an engineer or whatnot, and take pride in it, not just as an individual, but also as a black individual. Like, because I've seen moments where once a person starts to excel in an area and they're African American, then they'll start to congratulate or give accolades to that person for excelling, but then they'll also try to diminish their blackness, if that makes any sense. I honestly feel like that's the choice of the individual, not the people that are surrounding them. So in some ways, I feel like it's very important, especially in the day and age that we live in right now, to be very intentional about what you choose to represent. So like, if you're doing well in school, or you're doing well in business, and you come from a specific kind of culture or race, that you can identify proudly with that and be able to say, hey, I'm not just a proud business person or a proud doctor or a proud entrepreneur, but I'm a proud black or Latino or Asian American entrepreneur, and for it to not just be something where it's tied specifically to where your background or your culture comes from, but that it can be an additive aspect of it. But,
Dude, no, I agree with that, man. And I'll say that anytime that I was in college and meeting groups of people, and me being the most STEM heavy, 2 majors in STEM and math heavy, somehow the conversation would always go to, are you here for athletics? Are you here on an athletic scholarship? And it's just I'm not even sure what I'm doing that's making it seem like I'm some kind of athlete, because I'm not wearing anything athletic. I don't have athlete gear. I'm probably just have a backpack and I'm just dressed normally. And even if you see the athletes they like typically walk in like a group and like they've always got like some like workout clothes on. So it's like if I'm not giving any of those signals, like what is it that's like perpetuating such a strong impression that like you should be an athlete? You got to be an athlete.
Yeah, and like it's this thing where I believe it takes a large amount of emotional maturity. I would say spiritual maturity as well, to be able to still be loving in the presence of either ignorance or malicious intent, especially when it's like displayed in a very passive aggressive way. You know, there's been moments in my academic career where I would even have peers that, you know, I work alongside with and, you know, would still be respectful to and stuff. Like they'd see me doing things when they first saw me where, you know, I write up on a whiteboard, I'm trying to get my plan together for the week. I've had a moment where one of my peers would come up to me and they'd be like, "Oh wow, I'm impressed," and I would be like, "What are you impressed about?" "I'm making my plans for the week just like anybody else would." And just for them to say that, it's almost like a backhanded compliment. Is to say, I wouldn't expect for you to do something even on such a low level, let alone anything that exceeds that. Personally, that served as a motivation for me to do stuff more, but I wish that it wasn't like that, where it isn't this thing where I feel like I need to prove that to myself, hey, I can do this, and this isn't because you're helping me in any kind of special way, but because I'm putting the work in just like anybody else. But at the end of the day, I still feel like circumstances like that allow people in Black culture or African Americans to become a little bit more resilient than most, which I believe is necessary for the current day and age we live in. But I hope we get to a place to where it doesn't always call for that at such an expense. But
You kind of talked about like being intentional about going into these spaces and deciding to pursue whatever it might be beyond just the, you know what I'm saying, like basics of like maybe just a high school diploma. Like you mentioned being intentional about it, and I feel like that's very true, especially for like Black men in STEM or in any kind of profession like that, because you are seriously going to be like an extreme minority. Like you can expect that, but it's like if you are aware of the social climate and, you know what I'm saying, your relation to like the community that you're a part of, you know what I'm saying, that's something that I feel like you can use to empower yourself as almost like a trailblazer, because literally there has never been a path or an example of somebody doing what you may be doing. And so I would agree with you 100% that it definitely needs to be intentional. Like for me personally, you know, I have a degree in chemical engineering, and you know, I went to North Carolina State University, go Wolfpack. But you know, in the midst of pursuing my degree, you know, like, and I've always had like an interest in music, and you know, even like in high school, before I had the interest in music, coincidentally enough, like I had been to a couple of different like parties and stuff like that where people just assumed that I was gonna like break it down on the floor or something like that. And it's like, what? I just got here. I'm standing off to the side. But realistically, like I genuinely developed like a passion for like music and dance and things like that. And it was probably like going into my third year of college. You know, I had gotten like really sick, and you know, I really almost made the decision at that time to pivot and to get into a music school. So I applied to Berklee College of Music, which is a fantastic school out in Boston. And, you know, I was all the way ready to move out to Boston and to, you know what I'm saying, go to this school and give everything over to, you know what I'm saying, whatever they had to have for me there. But it was, I don't know, it was just a moment where I really thought hard about, you know, my position in relation to the greater community that I'm a part of, and when it came to like my siblings and those that were looking up to me to make an example, you know, they're watching to see what path I take. And I felt like that by me deciding to step back and pursue music, even though like I love the music and even though I'm still good at this, like I felt like a message that would have been sending no matter what I said was that, you know, like I'm not capable or like I can't finish it. And it's like, or it says to them that, you know, you started something that you didn't finish or something like that. And I guess like in that moment, at that crossroad, I felt it, you know, more important for me to make that impression and to, you know, be able to have that representation, for, chemical engineers within a space be done by like a black person and one that looks like myself. And I felt like that was something that inspired me, and that was much more important for like my life and like the impact that I want to leave. And yeah, I put music on the back burner, but there was an intentional choice that I made to, go into this space, continue it to completion, and to actually do this with my life so that people can see that black people can do this. And I've always been like a mentor to anybody that I can find younger than myself, just to try to like let them know, but you have to be intentional. And I feel like if you're lucky enough to have the opportunity to, go through a path of higher education or higher certification, then you need to be aware of, where you're at and what we're up against. Because without it, you kind of are leaving yourself like open to getting knocked off by just a million different things that want to knock you off. And I kind of want to take the opportunity, I guess, to segue into just talking about some different strategies that you can use in like your own local community or like in your own peer group to help overcome like imposter syndrome. So Robert L. Stewart Jr. He is the ASCCC treasurer, and that's the Academic Senate for California Community College. And so this is actually a black man in the local, community in California who you can only imagine the kind of microaggressions and imposter syndrome that a black man might get out in a place like, California, especially if you're, like, I don't know, like a traditional kind of a black man trying to go into these spaces. It can be very difficult to navigate it. And so this is something that he put together. And I'm definitely going to leave a link to it. But one of the things that he talks about as the first strategy is to build supportive communities. So to have like groups like, Minority Engineering or, Minority Writers Guild or a Black Student Union or something like that to provide a basis for community, which is where we typically find our support in places of higher education. And even in corporate spaces, you want to have things like groups where, you can go to for a safe place. Also, just emphasizing the importance of representation. That is something that is going to take more time because we have to work to get into these spaces, but representation is extremely important. And I feel like emphasizing that to younger individuals is probably a lot more important, just because them understanding that, there's a higher purpose and a greater purpose for their lives is something that, I don't want people to kind of sacrifice their life for this, but at the same time, being aware is very important. Also, institutions of higher learning, they can encourage the involvement of successful black professionals in STEM fields as guest speakers. So as someone who may have a degree in STEM, consider reaching back out or reaching back to your alma mater and, touching them and letting them know that, hey, I want to speak at something, and let people know that, I've come from this place and that people can come to this place that look like me. That's very important. And that's something that I'm going to make more of an effort myself to get involved with. But another really important one is the growth mindset. Cultivate a growth mindset within your communities. Cultivate it within the children that you may have the opportunity to interface with. Black students, they need some help understanding that mistakes and setbacks, they're essential. They're a part of the process for growth, and they should be seen as learning opportunities rather than failure to where you need to kind of get away from whatever it is that you're doing. It's a part of the process, and cultivating that kind of a mindset is very important for fighting against imposter syndrome. And lastly, work on developing a sense of belonging. Know that if you are there, you've earned your space and you belong there. And cultivating that mindset within Black STEM communities and other Black educational communities. And that could be in the ways of just, speaking to, your fellow Black colleagues or speaking to any of your colleagues with a sense of belonging and with the confidence that nobody can oust you from that space because you are qualified. So those are some of the things that I definitely wanted to kind of touch on. Was there anything that you wanted to share as far as like imposter syndrome or in reference to any of the things that we've discussed so far?
So there was one that you said in there that really stood out to me, and this thing about better representation. Sometimes more representation isn't always a good thing depending on how we're represented. So like I know there's people out there who think that it's a great thing to just have more black films, more black entertainment out there, but it's important to consider the kind of narrative that's being projected.
Absolutely.
Sometimes there will be more of those positive and negative stereotypes existing in that kind of representation, and I've definitely had like white friends or friends that aren't black be like, oh yeah, that's good, that's a great thing, and then I'll be like, well no, just because they have a character that in this show or in this film that's black, but then they're doing certain things that are diminishing to our culture or our race, those things still kind of do need to be taken into account.
Absolutely.
One thing that came to mind for me was there was this episode of New Girl that some of my friends were showing me like a couple years ago, and it was this basically this episode where they had confused the black character on the show for having an issue with crack cocaine, and the way that they had dressed it up was in a comedic sense, but still the underlying message that was under it was that it's okay to make the assumption that if you have a friend that's black, that they come from a certain background, and not just to say that it's wrong based on a sense of like accuracy or whatnot, but I think that it's also wrong in the sense of saying that a person's identity is tied to that. So representation is everything. I think that we have to be a lot more aware of as a society, but especially within the black community, of what kind of narrative are we pushing on the youth. Something that comes to mind for me is like kind of what inspired me to pursue what I'm pursuing in college, which is physics. And that was like when I had first seen one of the first popular Marvel movies that had come out earlier in like the 2000s. It was Iron Man. And even though the main character of that film, he wasn't black, I was still looking at it as a place, well, it would be cool if I could do that. If I could just, it was that scene where he basically made a whole Iron Man suit in a cave. And people were mad about it because they thought that he couldn't do it. And this idea of somebody being able to surpass someone's expectations, even in a place where they're confined by restrictions, was something that I felt very inspiring to me, especially as just a black youth. But something that I wish would start to be a little bit more common is being able to see that, but then the person that's representing that character is someone that looks like you or me. At least for the audience that would be looking at it that's African American. Because it exists in other places. It's just something I feel like is necessary to kind of break down that imposter syndrome. Because you think of like, if you get to a place to where, I'm a successful engineer or inventor or coder or something related to STEM, and Iron Man was my inspiration or whatnot, but Iron Man wasn't black. So some people might argue to me, you've become this, but you've been doing it in the pursuit of somebody who doesn't look like you. So have you aborted or diverted from your blackness in doing so? And that's the thing where there are some aspects of that where I feel like subconsciously can still resonate, but then I feel like it's still necessary for there to be narratives where we see people like us, so that there isn't this subconscious thought in the back of your head like, because I'm pursuing this, I'm leaving something that currently identifies my identity, if that makes any sense. But
kind of makes me think of like Shuri in Black Panther, and how she was like the genius of the movie that was even smarter than Tony Stark in a lot of ways. And like it makes me think of how I felt whenever like that movie came out. You know, I was still like in school and like actually got like a group of like 20 some odd people together to like go to the movies like wearing all black. And like it was crazy because before that movie, like there was no basis that would prompt all of us to like go in solidarity to do something like that. And like I felt so charged up as like a black person like in STEM to know that like, okay, that kind of representation is what's out there. And it makes me think of, you know, like what could like other children who were watching, because if I'm getting this excited like as a grown adult, you know what I'm saying, like what might a child be feeling like it's watching like something like this?
Sure.
Yeah, so I know that movie alone created like a million black engineers or like a million black kids that want to be engineers. And I think that something like that is very beautiful. But yeah, so yeah, I guess that kind of wraps up our discussion on just like black culture with respect to black men and their pursuit of success through education. Kind of to summarize it, a lot of the things that we touched on kind of circled or centered around education and the different majors that black men are pursuing. We also talked about the motivators and the stressors and the inhibitors that tend to deter black men away from pursuing education. And we had a nice discussion on imposter syndrome. So we're definitely going to share some different resources that you guys can follow up with, such as the documentary that we mentioned and a couple of the different sources of data that we use to kind of bolster this discussion, just because sharing information is kind of what we're all about. But with that, I'm Lee. Was there anything else that you wanted to say, Josh?
I just want to say thank you for having me on the show. I appreciated the conversation, man.
It was a great talk, man. Thank you for coming out and taking the time. Thank you for taking this seriously because it's very serious.
Yeah, and I definitely think conversations like these should be a lot more prominent in the African American community for us to be able to overcome certain things that just are stuck in the psychology.
Yeah. So, we got to talk about it. That's for sure. And just for any viewers, please leave comments, in the comment section. If you could just talk about some things that you might want to hear us discuss on this podcast, we definitely appreciate that kind of feedback. And we definitely take it to heart. Without further ado, see y'all next time.